In this episode, we mix business and technical knowledge. Hi, and welcome to ScaleYourCode.com, and thank you so much for joining us for another episode. As always, I am your host, Christoph Limplayer, and today I'm joined by John Daniel Trask, who is the co-founder and CEO of a company called Raygun, which gives you app performance and error tracking all in one platform. So this is basically something that every developer around the world needs, like how do we track errors in production in real time, and how can we implement performance tracking to find and fix bottlenecks. So in this episode, we're going to focus on how this platform is built from a technical point of view, but I also turn to JD for some business advice. That way, even if you are technically oriented, but you have business aspirations, we can learn from someone who started out with a technical background and later went on to co-found a company and now sets the strategy as the CEO of that company. This episode is made possible thanks to two sponsors, Hired.com and Linuxacademy.com. Hired.com is offering a bonus for listeners of the show who get hired through their platform. So instead of the $1,000 sign-on bonus, they're doubling it for listeners, so you get $2,000 once you get a job through Hired. On top of that, they offer a stress-free and faster job search with some of the best companies like Facebook and smaller emerging companies if you prefer that. The search is tailored to you and without pushy recruiters trying to sell you roles that you don't want. Go to scaleyourcode.com/hired to check it out. You can also go to scaleyourcode.com/Linux for access to all of our features and content. And by the way, we just released a big data section, and we also have way more content in all of the other sections that we offer. So check that out by going to scaleyourcode.com/Linux Academy. JD, thank you so much for coming back on Scale Your Code. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
And I did say thank you for coming back because we actually tried to do this episode a few months ago, and we went through the episode, but we started realizing that we were having technical issues to the point where the audio was sometimes hard to hear. It was getting choppy and things like that. So sadly, I actually had to throw out the episode. And here we are today. Thanks to JD being willing to try again, give me another shot. We're going to try again and do this episode and see if everything works out okay. So JD, thanks so much for giving me your time and joining us again. I really appreciate it.
It's not a problem. It's like I like to say, if it wasn't for technology problems, we wouldn't be in business anyway. So
that's a very good point. Even with all the experience that you could have in technology, sometimes it's just not reliable. I mean, the internet, after all, is a pretty crazy infrastructure when you think about it, so you're bound to have some issues. But anyway, moving on, I kind of introduced what Raygun is and what you can do with it, but I want to hear it from the CEO. Can you explain a little bit more about what Raygun is and what you guys offer?
Yeah, sure. So the way I describe it is being a software diagnostics and performance tracking platform. So what that means is we have two products under the Raygun brand. One is Raygun Crash Reporting and one is Raygun Pulse. Crash Reporting is sort of like your black box flight recorder. It's tracking everything that breaks. It's aggregating that data, providing you insight into patterns. It's also making sure that it doesn't kill your inbox by smartly grouping things together and then sending you things as rates change, things like that. And Pulse allows you to measure the way that your users are using your software. So that might be the time that it takes them to make, transition through a workflow on your website, how long pages are taking to load, what's slowing down the pages, things like that. But having said all of that, we do support mobile, web, desktop, backend, everything. So we're a full stack provider of tools to provide software teams with insights into what's going on with their software.
And I mentioned in the introduction that you have a more technical background. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you got started with computers and how you came to this point?
Yeah, sure. So I started programming computers when I was 9 years old. My family got a computer and we had DOS with Windows 3.11 on it, and I was literally going through every DOS command I could find, and I got to the letter Q and stumbled onto QBasic. And to me, it was like finding a Lego kit with unlimited pieces, where the only limiting factor was basically my own brain on how I could try and achieve whatever I wanted. I could build anything in there. And that really just captured my imagination from that point. And I started buying the time off my siblings for the computer, $1 an hour to make sure I got more programming time. And the passion really blossomed from there.
That's hilarious. I remember having also time slots. I don't think I ever bribed my brother. I don't recall doing that. So obviously you're a little bit smarter than me in that regard. That's brilliant. I should have done that. But yes, back then we did have those time slots as kids, and it's funny. I don't remember starting that young. I wasn't programming at 9 years old. I can tell you that much. I was probably playing video games instead, and then eventually moving on to some programming and playing around with the hardware and things like that. But that's always interesting to hear how you got started, where you got the passion from, and how that got you to where you are today. Going back to Raygun, when you look at some of these businesses, sometimes looking back on them, you can say, hey, this is a really good idea. I I can definitely see something like Raygun being a big success in the market, but it's always easier to look back and say it looking at successful companies today than it is to find those ideas in the future. So did you always know that Raygun was going to be a big success, or how did you even get or stumble upon the idea for this product?
So the idea came was something that I'd sort of been kicking around ever since we started the company, and it really went back to the 3 years that I worked in the industry, where software would break and you'd write your own code to send yourself an email, and that was kind of useful. Like, it meant that you could at least debug things a little bit quicker, with the downside being that there was no sort of grouping. You'd get overwhelmed with emails. There was no real smarts to it. There was no workflow. There was no integration with your other tools. And then largely you'd move off onto other projects and not want those emails anymore. And once you desensitize yourself to them, you'd actually miss when something severe turned up. So we'd been talking a fair bit about how there must be a better way of doing that and handling that scenario, and that other developers must have the same problems. But having said that, I mean, we bootstrapped our business, and we did a bunch of services work for people, and we built a range of other businesses. So we built a website to help New Zealanders donate money online. We sold that. We did all sorts of different things. We built other products that didn't sell nearly as well, and then we eventually got to Raygun. Even though it had been something we'd wanted to build from the very start, it took us a while to actually get around to building it, and it turned out to be a really great product. It met the market, and a lot of people really like it.
How did you realize, or when did you realize that you were very interested in building these kinds of businesses and just working around business and not just working on products themselves and writing the code and things like that, but actually trying to sell the product itself?
Well, I've sold commercial software for quite some time. So I think I started selling software when I was about 14 at my high school. And I always think I've been on the intersection of business and technology. I love what technology can do. I think it's mankind's sort of superpower. But at the same time, business allows you to sort of get more people involved and get more achieved. In a similar way, business and technology are all about amplifying human capability. So when I was younger and I sort of started writing code, and I was sort of looking around and thinking about what the opportunities were that were out there, became fairly evident when you looked at the market that software was exploding in the mid-90s. And so it was like, well, this is great. What I'm passionate about can equally be coupled to a way to make money and have enough money, good life, it all just sort of came together. So I've always been on that intersection.
So you said that in the 90s you really saw software as exploding, and obviously it's still exploding today and has been exploding for quite a while now. And we hear a lot of talk about AI, artificial intelligence, and augmented reality and things like that. Do you see that also being something that's going to explode in the future? And if so, how can you, going back to when you were younger and trying to find the opportunities, do you have any tips for people who are trying to find opportunities in that, how to wrap their head around the possibilities?
Well, I mean, firstly, I think it's a mistake to just try and think up something and expect that you're going to nail it. I mean, like I said, we built other products. They sold, but not as well. And so we learned a lot from that process about what works and what doesn't. And I think that's the important thing, is to make sure that if you are having your first sort of dipping your toe into your own business, is to realize that one of the things that you're actually getting out of it is an education. you're learning about how to run a business, how to operate, what does marketing look like. As engineers, we typically have that belief that if we build it, they will come. And even though every engineer I ever talk to kind of goes, oh yeah, everybody thinks that, but you've got to do marketing. It's like, yeah, but everybody kind of still thinks maybe I'll just be the one that makes it so damn good that everybody will just fall in love with it. I've had some friends where they've built businesses that haven't succeeded, and they usually, once the initial pain sort of goes away, appreciate everything that they've learned from it. And it's much more than just trying to make a pile of money.
And I'm sure not all of your enterprises and things that you've worked on have been big successes. I'm sure some of them have had more success than others in finding that product to market fit. So is it just a matter of trying until you find something that sticks to the wall and then you just run with that and take off, or how's that work?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's that saying where failing is fine as long as it's not fatal. You don't want to kill your business or jeopardize your own life in any way by being hell bent on needing to make the first or second idea work. We were fortunate that we had built up the products, but we were fairly well respected in the New Zealand developer ecosystem. So we got various service contracts that we were working on while building up products. The one thing I would say was really valuable was by building the other products that didn't resonate as much with the market, it really emphasized to us when Raygun was meeting the market at how different it was. So, for example, we launched that product in 2013, and within about 2 months, we had people emailing us saying, hey, really like your product. Can I do a case study for you? And it was kind of like, wow, that's quite different. People don't normally like reach back to the customer, back to the provider and say, hey, can I do this for you? So that was the first sign that we were on to something. And then, of course, the actual just growth of the product in terms of people signing up, talking about it, has been phenomenal.
What about pricing? A lot of times when you talk to technical founders or co-founders, they they have a problem with trying to charge for their product, or they think that by using the freemium model, they will get that bigger traction in the beginning, or even after, like maybe they start the company, they start charging initially, and they want more growth, so they cut the costs, or they introduce a freemium model with upgrades or anything like that, or ads or whatever it is. What do you think about that? Did you charge from the beginning? Do you think that's the way to go? What do you think?
Yeah, so we've charged from the beginning. I believe that if you're providing value, you should charge for it. It's the way to make it sustainable. It sort of blows my mind how often it seems to be particularly endemic with software engineers where it's like, oh, I went for the thing that was free. And you're like, cool, well, that won't be around very long. I mean, I can't count the hacker news threads that I've read where people are, boo-hooing over some company that's going out of business. And it's like, yeah, but nobody was paying them. Like, of course they're going out of business. My favorite thing is when I like a service and I discover that they have a sensible pricing model, I have a lot more confidence that they'll be around the next day. And you hit on something there where you sort of suggested that they might go, and tell me if I'm wrong, go to freemium to try and get the growth going.
Yes.
And it's like, you certainly won't accelerate your revenues. You'll have a really great vanity metric, And I talk to a lot of other business owners, and it's interesting how many people, when they talk about their customer count, have a definition for customer that doesn't include them giving you money, which is always weird to me when I see people, oh, we've got this many thousand customers. Cool, how many of them give you money? Well, actually, not that many. So, that's a problem. I think freemium, definitely no argument freemium can work, but you've just got to be really honest with yourself that you're not doing it for vanity metrics to feel good. And equally, you've got to have a really, really big market, I think. You don't really want to do freemium unless you honestly believe you could still get 100,000 paying customers, and that probably means that you have about 10 million free users. So it's a hard place to be. And I think a lot of engineering types, we sort of shy away from billing for things because I'll do that down the track once the product's really great. And it's like, well, truth be told, until somebody parts with money, you can't trust when they say, oh yeah, I really like your product, I'd use it. It's like, cool, you give me some money for it. And that's the test. If they then go, well, actually, no, you don't have any product market fit. Like you need to, money is a great decider.
Where do you start with the pricing though? Where do you say, hey, let's launch this product and try this price, and then if a lot of people buy it, maybe we'll raise the price. If we don't have that many customers, maybe we'll lower the price. What do you think about that?
I mean, you've got to pick somewhere to start. There's a great book written by one of the co-founders of Redgate Software, the guys that build database tools, called Don't Just Roll the Dice, and it's all about software pricing. It's a free ebook that you can get. You've got to pick something. I don't think that if you're charging anything and you think, I'm not getting enough customers, maybe I should lower the price. That's very rarely, in my experience, the right approach. It's better to think, how can I improve the value that I'm providing for those dollars? That's really how people, even at least subconsciously, think, am I getting enough value out of this? So I also see all the time, Paddy O'Levin, Mr. Bingo card creator himself, frequently sort of tweeting about how people should increase their prices because they get afraid. We're all quite emotional. We don't like to feel rejected, so we kind of think we're taking away barriers by charging a very small amount. But you've really got to look at your cost to serve. So going back to the freemium model, it's like, well, if I've got 1 million people that are not paying me, they're going to expect support. And as much as you want to say we don't provide support to free customers, well, you're not going to convert them to paid if you don't support them in the first place. So it's a bit of a catch-22. That can really increase your costs of operating.
Finding the right job is hard. Even if you have the right skill set, the best positions are usually not even open to the public. So a lot of people will turn to recruiters, but they're oftentimes trying to sell you roles you don't actually want. And even if you do get in touch with a company that looks promising, you go through the entire interview process just to find out at the very end that the salary is not what you're looking for, basically just wasting your time. Instead, you can use Hired. Hired is the world's most intelligent talent matching platform for both full-time and contract opportunities in engineering, development, design, product management, data science, sales, and marketing. They make the job search faster and focused on exactly what you want. Top employers apply to hire you instead of the other way around, and you receive numbers right away to help you make the best decision possible. Check it out because right now they're giving listeners a $2,000 hiring bonus, which is double their regular rate bonus. Go to scaleyourcode.com/hired and find exactly what you've been looking for. This is a really tricky question, so I appreciate you giving some feedback on that. The question comes from a new podcast that I've actually started listening to and run across recently called A16Z. I believe it's from
Andreessen
Horowitz, yes. Yep. Thank you. Great podcast. They talk about this. They talk about freemium. They talk about pricing and charging and things like that. So if you don't know where to start, that might be a good place to start. And hopefully this discussion also helped you out a little bit. Now, JD, I do have a few more business questions for you. And then I know a lot of people will want to hear some of the technical details as well. So let's go through those and then we'll move on to technical questions, Sure. If you don't mind. But just from seeing some growth at different companies, you guys have had a lot of growth, right? Can you share some of the stats of how many employees you have and maybe some of the growth that you've had over the years?
Yeah, I mean, we're not massive in terms of headcount. We're about 30 odd staff at the moment. We're probably going to be 50 or 60 by the end of the year. So things are ticking along nicely. Unlike we're a New Zealand headquartered business, so we haven't run the company like say a Silicon Valley startup. So we're not burning a whole lot of money to have that growth. It's actually just driven entirely off revenue expansion, which is good. But what we started to see was, obviously, we talked a bit about this before kicking off the podcast, is about the culture and the handling of increasing the headcount. And when you start off and you're sort of maybe 2, 3, to 5 people, you've got high bandwidth communication going on. Everybody knows everything. Everybody's probably to some degree involved in every decision, or at least aware that conversation's going down. And then somewhere in the sort of teens, mid-teens for the headcount size, you start not wanting to bog everybody down with every decision. But at the same time, you've got to sort of manage the fact that folks will then feel like perhaps they're being cut out of a conversation, which is not the case. You're actually just trying to maintain agility and be shipping fast. And so that's when you start having to look at quite seriously about the culture. And we've done a lot of work to I'd say partly improve the culture by getting everybody on the same page and talking about it. So we established our company values, and they are up on the wall, and we did a lot of workshopping around that. And a book that I found really useful for this was called Scaling Up. And to be honest, it's a bit of a dry book, but it's kind of referencey, but it sort of talks about what are some of the processes you can look at putting in place as a company is growing. And it's reasonably prescriptive, but at the same time, they qualify that you shouldn't try and roll out every single thing they say in the book. But we found that useful for developing out the initial sort of values, the core mission, how we communicate that with everybody on the team. And we put in place other things to make sure everybody still feels like they're heard. And that's been really helpful.
So that sounds a little bit more like it's coming from the side of the management, where you're trying to keep that agility, you're trying to keep people involved and things like that. What about from the other side of maybe an employee who's more technical oriented and works on the code base or the infrastructure or something like that, but they also have aspirations to maybe help set some of the strategy? Do you have any recommendations for people who are in that position where they started out technically oriented, but they're trying to grow into more of a strategic position in their startup? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the view I'd take on that is that sort of position is earned, not given. And there are certainly folks that sort of would say, oh, and this is not in our company, but just in general, this sort of like, well, if I was just given the chance to have input on this, and it's like, well, just have, give input. I'm a big believer in just sort of jumping in and providing, writing things down, suggestions, even if it's sort of, semi above your station, if you will. Talking. I remember in the company that I worked for before starting Raygun, and I remember writing this big write-up because the company was growing quite rapidly, and there was a lot of sort of challenges going on as it was growing. And so I wrote out my theories on ways that we could improve things, and then provided that to my manager at the time. Now, that's obviously not part of my job description to be, suggesting how if we change things, but you just go ahead and do it. Once you're behaving that way, people will respect it, appreciate it. They may give you some pushback on it, but usually it'll be constructive pushback, unless they're a terrible manager. But
Right.
I'm a believer in just do it. If take for example, let's say we were planning another product, and somebody on the team was particularly passionate about it, but they weren't the director of product. I'd still, if they came in and said, hey, so I've spent some time thinking about this, and here's how I think we could structure things, and here's what I've seen in the competitive landscape, whatever, it would be lapped up, appreciated, and reflect positively in any sort of performance review.
Awesome. I really sincerely hope that this helps some of the people listening to this if they're ever in that kind of situation, or if they're in a growing startup where you do have some of those cultural changes that many of us have seen. Hopefully that this advice really helps you guys out. And if it does, please leave a comment and thank JD for helping us with these business questions. So let's move on a little bit more to some technical.
Well, I'll just touch on it.
Sure.
If you're working in an organization where you think there's no way I could do that, I'd find another organization. That's
Right.
Generally people should appreciate folks going above and beyond. But if they get sort of, offended or upset about it, then that would be a worry to me.
Going back to when you were saying that could be a bad manager in the case of if you do have some data and some real evidence to back up your claim or say, I think we should go this direction because of X, Y, and Z, and your idea is just brushed aside for no reason at all, then yes, like JD was saying, maybe it's time to look at a different job or a different company where the managers are more receptive to that kind of thing. But also another interesting point before we move on, there are a lot of first-time founders, and it's not necessarily that they may not be listening to your input or things like that, or they don't value your input. It might just be that they're frankly just learning as they go, and they're going to make mistakes. Nobody's perfect, as we all know. So sometimes it might be a matter of working with the founders and trying to figure out where the friction is and things like that, if that makes any sense. So hopefully this advice helps some people out.
Yeah, first-time founders, I can assure you, we're sitting there hoping that we're just maybe a chapter ahead in the book from where the staff are. But usually any sort of input is appreciated. Again, it's about being collaborative, and sharing information.
Awesome. So I have questions about, first of all, how we can implement something like Raygun in any kind of application, because you can plug this in most languages and most apps, I assume. How does that work? How do you plug it into your application, and where does the data or the errors, where do those go, and how do you see them?
Yeah, so the way that we integrate, we call the integrations a provider. So they integrate at the code level. So it's not like where you install an agent on a box. You're actually baking in a library or an SDK with your code base. So, for example, if you were using .NET, you can grab the NuGet package. If you're using Java, there's a jar file. There's whatever is the native implementation for any given language or platform. And then usually it's 1 or 2 lines to get about 80% of the capability up and running. And like I say, the crash reporting side operates like a black box flight recorder. So it sits there quietly doing nothing, not really consuming any resources at all until something blows up. Then it springs into life, grabs all the data, sends it off to our servers. So we're a cloud-based offering. That's all encrypted over the wire. It's all encrypted at our end. We can support customers who are, in the healthcare industry, finance space, all of that. We take security very seriously. And then we do analysis on that, send off those notifications, give you a beautiful dashboard where you can log in and see everything. So that's the crash reporting side. The Pulse side is very similar. Because that's tracking real user information, like their timings, there's a mobile SDK and there's a web SDK. The web SDK is just a JavaScript file, because that's obviously the part that impacts the user. And very similar approach, where it's just really setting up your API key and it sort of automatically does the rest.
Are you using Amazon Web Services or?
We are presently entirely hosted on Amazon Web Services. We use a range of their capabilities. Yep.
And this is a question I recently saw, I think I saw it this week actually, where somebody was asking how the cloud could be more secure than on-premises data centers, where you have a little bit more control over how things go, whereas with Amazon Web Services, you may not have as much control. But what you're saying is we do have that ability to have encryption from end to end, from the client all the way to our internal resources, so that we can have all of that protected. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm feel more confident using a cloud provider. I mean, at the end of the day, AWS is going to be employing a whole bunch of people that take this stuff super seriously. So we're fortunate that my co-founder and our CTO is very security minded, but we also pay for things like quarterly penetration tests to be run against the service. We have a bounty program. There's all sorts of things in place to try and make sure that security is taken seriously. We do internal audits of the security setup that we actually have inside of AWS, all of that stuff. But yeah.
Right, because you might be getting some sensitive information, like maybe users' information or payment information of any kind, or like you said, healthcare and things like that. If you have an error or anything being tracked, then it might pull that out, send it to your services, and I'm sure you have some kinds of scrubbers that go through the data and can hide that kind of information, right?
Yeah, absolutely. All of those providers that you integrate with your code, you can actually do filtering at that level, and obviously any of the identifiable information can be removed. We do have a really cool feature called vectored user tracking, where we can handle it with an anonymous ID, that's fine. But if you can share like a email address and name, you actually get a full view of all of your users, all of their sessions, what they did in those sessions, what errors they've been impacted by. And you can run into scenarios with that, for example, where you might want to contact the users that were impacted by an error. You can do that directly within Raygun to say, hey, we're really sorry about this. We've resolved this problem. And of course, that kind of blows users' minds these days because they're not used to a software company really caring that much that something broke. So it's a great way to turn at-risk users into huge advocates. But so there are benefits with the more you can provide, and we don't, we have a pretty good privacy policy where we don't sell the data or do anything with it, but it really is up to our customers on what they're comfortable sharing and what their privacy policy is. We also do a lot of work with customers who have sensitive data to make sure that they effectively get paired up with one of our engineers to make sure that when they're setting things up in the first place, that they're scrubbing things correctly.
What kind of services in Amazon Web Services are you using, like, for example, for load balancers, web servers, queues, or anything like that, databases?
So we use just ordinary EC2 instances. We use the Elastic load balancers. We do have some proxy instances running in the mix that we manage for some load balancing. We use their auto-scaling around the API side of things. So we've peaked at hundreds of thousands of requests per second being processed through the platform. So having auto-scaling is brilliant. We run RabbitMQ internally for our queuing. We have several different types of RDS instances, so across MySQL and Postgres. We've got Elasticsearch in the mix. We use the S3 block storage a fair bit. And we've written our own sort of storage engine that sits over the top of that as well to help minimize the costs associated with that, and as well as improve performance for anywhere in there. We've got some Redis in there. There's a whole random set. We have part of the system written in .NET, part of it's written in Go, part of it's written in Node. It's all over the show.
I'm curious to hear more about your usage of Elasticsearch. So you said you use databases in RDS like MySQL, etc. When does Elasticsearch become useful, and what kinds of data do you deal with when it comes to Elasticsearch?
So we use Elasticsearch with error data, and so that allows customers to search through their data. So to put it in context, nearly every customer thinks that they won't have that many errors when they sign up for a trial. And then they're usually blown away where they're like, oh, wait, 450,000 errors a month? Like, I had no idea. But they might then want to search for, we collect a lot of information on every error. They might be looking for a particular method name that's appeared in a stack trace. They might be looking for a particular user. They might be looking for a message in a string. They might be looking for a URL. So we index all that data, and they can actually do very sophisticated filtering and searching to understand what's going on with their software faults. So that's what we're using Elasticsearch for search.
Linux Academy now has a 7-day free trial, so you can try it out and see if it fits your learning style. If you're looking for certification training or for shorter content to take your Linux, AWS, DevOps, OpenStack, Big Data, or Azure skills to the next level, go to scalarcode.com/Linux Academy to get your 7-day free trial that you can cancel at any time. We've also just released a major update to our community and added new features like study groups, note cards, learning plans, and cloud credentials, which evaluate your skills in real time and on real servers so you can show off on your resume with respected credentials. Check it out at scalarcode.com/Linux Academy. And you're able to do this in near real time, right? Where an error triggers, it gets sent via your API through, I assume, the Elastic load balancers, your web servers, and things like that. Some kind of processing happens, you store the data in some of the databases, you index it with Elasticsearch. How do you do that in near real time?
So yeah, normally we will have processed an error once it hits the API. From the API to, say, the point of notifying the customer, it's usually about 120 milliseconds. So it's pretty quick. We get people who sort of joke that they get their Raygun notification before the error page is loaded in their app. Um, we've done a fair bit of work to make sure that our processing speeds are as quick as possible, and that includes things like the storage engine that we've written ourselves. There's basically that we've optimized that inbound processing. We've also done a lot of work to make sure that it's very, very scalable. So we haven't had, no, knock on wood, but haven't had an API outage basically at all.
Wow.
So we've worked really hard to make sure that that's very resilient because customers depend on that. And that just means that if the load does go up, things just scale out. We have done a bit of work to ensure that if we had, say, one customer just going absolutely berserk, like let's say there was somebody generating 200,000 exceptions per second, and how do we make sure that we don't have a noisy neighbor type scenario arise where it suddenly slows down your error processing? So the way that the queuing works with the way that the striping works across those queues means that while the queue could go up, it won't slow down the processing on your queue. So I've done a fair bit of work and fair bit of planning around that.
So if somebody is in a similar situation, maybe they have some kind of API they're trying to build out and they want to make sure that it scales and it has an amazing uptime, like you just said, how do you, or what are some recommendations? I know you just mentioned queues, you have stuff like autoscaling. Are there any other ways to test your infrastructure while it's in production to see if you have any bottlenecks or any weak points or anything like that? Have you guys done any of that kind of work?
We do load testing for various different things. Then we also do a lot of performance work on various components at development time. So, I love when I see a developer is running a profiler. I like code to be efficient. When something is going slow, it's fairly evident to us. We track all of the metrics on our platform, and once something needs too much processing time or whatever, that's a candidate to pull down and simulate. So like for example, right now we're doing some work with some of the pulse data, and one customer's data is about 300 gigabytes worth of database space, and so it's like, well, okay, that's a good corpus to actually do some testing on for performance and actually sit down on a machine, run your profile, see where the time's going.
Are there any specific tools you use for performance tracking, or how can you tell how long something takes and then trace back to, hey, this is the culprit. This is why we have this taking longer than usual, or etc.
Yep. So we use a mixture of tools around our operations. Obviously, we have Raygun tracking big parts of Raygun. We also have our home-built monitoring system that we've got our own sort of custom app for on the iPhones of the team members about what's going wrong if something does go wrong, and that tracks things like queue lengths, worker timings, things like that. We also make a lot of use of StatsD for timing various operations and counters. We pump all of that into a mixture of Librato and Datadog. So found Datadog to be very handy for that. And so that allows us to sort of understand what the health of the platform is. Generally, we can build out dashboards and monitor what's going on.
Okay, anyway, you're right. Skype should use Raygun to find out what happened there because it was perfectly fine on my end. Not sure what happened, but the connection timed out for a second or two. Anyway, I don't know if you heard any of what I was saying or not, but I was just impressed by how in tune you are with the technical side of the business because a lot of times when I talk to some of the management or the CEOs, even if it's not a terribly large company, they're not so in tune with the technical aspects of how their platform is being run. But you seem to know a lot about the technical side of things. How do you stay in tune with that? Do you still work on technical things? Do you still write code? Do you still work on some of the infrastructure? Or do you just have communication with the engineers and that's how you know all of this?
Well, I think it goes back to the start of the conversation with my overall passion for technology. So I still write a little bit of code, usually more on the weekends. I like to hack around with things. I've got, all sorts of, I've got a Oculus Rift and I like to write some code to make that render up. I like to play with database tools. I've been playing with .NET Core on Linux. I'm passionate about the tech side of things. So usually even if I overhear a remark, it goes in there, it gets filed away. I'm also very fortunate that we've last year we hired an excellent general manager, And so she's really helped take a lot of the administrative burden off of me. So obviously, as we've been growing, I used to do a lot more broad amount of work than what I do now. She's taken that off me. That gives me a little bit more time to look at the technical aspects of what's going on. I also work closely with our director of product around where we're taking the product based on things I think that we should be putting in there, what I hear from customers, that sort of thing. So I'm spread pretty thin, but the, they'll pry my keyboard from my cold dead hands one day.
That's hilarious. This is a very difficult interview for me because I'm drawn to both sides of the conversation. I have so many more business questions that I'd like to ask you, and so many more technical questions to ask you. Unfortunately, I can't have your whole day, so I do have to pick my battles. But going back to some of the performance testing that we were talking about earlier, you have a lot of data going through your platform and both error tracking but also performance tracking. Is there or are there any specific performance bottlenecks that you see a lot of applications running into that maybe if they just tweak this a little bit, they wouldn't have this performance problem?
Yeah, so we do see that a lot. We see, for example, with the pulse for the web story. Um, all of us devs, we talk about, oh, I'm using Angular, I'm using Backbone, I'm using React. The amount of time that's going into the front end around rendering and the DOM manipulation stuff, we sort of get all of that timing, and it's been semi-alarming to see how consistently across the board on modern web apps, the amount of time being wasted on that render part. That's just a consistent theme. The other one is just how non-dependable a lot of third-party script files are, whether it's that they are incredibly slow to respond, whether they don't have any cache headers, or how often they actually go down. So we see, for example, the timeouts that occur trying to load certain resources, and you kind of go, oh, such and such a company is, without naming names, $100 billion plus tech company. Surely they should be serving those script files a little bit more reliably than we're seeing. So they're big ones that we see consistently. And I don't know when this is going to air, but we're just about to drop a capability into Pulse for the web story where we automatically run the sort of page speed tests on every asset that we see or every page that we see coming through Raygun Pulse, so that we can then say to people, hey, look, this asset's missing E tags, this one's doing this, and you can watch those changes over time and how they impact performance. So that's an exciting addition that's about to come out to highlight to our customers exactly what their common performance problems are. So as an example, you've probably had a web page that's been slow in the past, you go and feed it through why slow or page speed, and it says this, and this is wrong, and you fix them up. This is because it's automatically running over all of the pages in your system. We could actually say, hey, you know what, this resource, maybe it's not even a page, it's a resource, is missing like an E tag caching attribute. But because it's referenced from every single page on your website, it's actually dragging down the performance of your entire site. So it allows people to better rank what they should be fixing because they can have the biggest impact.
It almost sounds like a large part of the issues come from that caching or the small little tweaks that you were just mentioning, as well as the rendering time on the client side and things like that, rather than maybe some back-end performance issues related to the database or the web server or the application itself. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, so we do track the amount of time that the server spends generating the pages, but it's just been a case where looking at the data that we've been receiving, we've sort of been able to go, oh, okay, actually that's fairly frequently quite well optimized, and that might just be a function of the fact that server hardware is pretty good these days, or developers are more likely to notice that the server response time is slow when they're running things on their dev machine, but they might not notice latency problems because localhost is pretty low latency.
Right.
So yeah, we don't see too many problems with the server side.
And the other thing with performance that can be very tricky is you could be testing it from your computer, even if it's not the local host, and you may get very fast performance, but that could be because you're very close to a CDN or the main server or data center where the application is hosted. Whereas if you cross the Atlantic Ocean or go somewhere that's very far geographically, that may not be the case. So how do you test for those differences in geography and other maybe different devices like mobile devices that have slower CPUs and can't handle some of the same rendering and things like that? I assume that the answer to that is using some of those tools that give you the visibility into what's going on at what time from which clients and from what part of the world and that sort of thing.
So Raygun Pulse does exactly that. It breaks down the performance data by geo, by browser, by operating system, all of that. So that's part of the value prop of how we sell that to customers, because we use it ourselves. We also have the dubious benefit that we're headquartered in Wellington, New Zealand, so we are almost as far as we possibly could be from our production hardware, and therefore if it's fast for us in New Zealand, then it's blindingly fast for almost everybody else. So we have offices. We're headquartered in Wellington, New Zealand. We now got I'm building this sales office up here in Seattle. We've also got Denver, Portland, and San Mateo.
Nice. Awesome. That's some good growth. Well, JD, thank you so much for doing this episode. I did want to say that if people have a curiosity or more questions about performance enhancements and things like that for their applications, I do have an episode with Ilya Grigorik from Google where he specializes in performance and things like that. So check out that episode. I actually don't remember off the top of my head what episode number that is, but if you go on scaleyourcode.com/interviews, then you can search for the Ilya Grigorik one or any of the other episodes that you feel like listening and check them out. JD, thanks so much for doing this episode. If someone wants to reach out and say hi or thank you for your time, how do you recommend that they do that?
I'm a big fan of Twitter, so I'm Trask JD on Twitter. That's TraskJD. Or they can email me directly at jdtrask@raygun.com.
Thanks again for doing this, JD, and thank you all for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Hope you have a great week. Bye-bye.